that this issue of partnership cannot be pursued only when the government believes it is convenient for it to do so, or when it believes it is in its political interest. If we are to succeed in fighting crime, we need all citizens on board. The underlying causes of the state of violence must be the focus of intervention rather than violence itself. In other words, Mr. Speaker, we need to examine and tackle the root causes rather than focus on the symptoms or on the outcomes. There is a broad agreement among anthropologists, sociologists, psychologists, social workers, and the police that the root causes of crime in Jamaica are factional politics, absent fathers and unsupported single mothers, weak law enforcement, deficits in the education system, lack of adequate care and supervision of our boys. Let us be clear, Mr. Speaker. Sustainable crime reduction will require long and medium-term measures. More, and I emphasize, more than short-term measures. I can appreciate that most citizens will want to see instant solutions, and that is understandable when you're living in fear. But in reality, sustainable reduction will take time. They are imperative for creating a truly safe Jamaica for all. They are the kind of decisions, Mr. Speaker, and actions that are truly responsible, and responsible leadership must make those decisions. I emphasize, Mr. Speaker, if we are serious about this country's long-term interests, we have to be prepared to make those long-term decisions now. In fact, let me emphasize, that is the mission of the party that I am a part of. It's not about a quick fix. It's about building the foundations that can have a lasting security for our people. Long-term measures, Mr. Speaker, are built on violence reduction as against violence suppression. States of emergencies or zones of special operations are forms of violence suppression, but they cannot be sustained over the long haul. Mr. Speaker, they effectively displace and temporarily disrupt violence producers, but they do not reduce the propensity to violence. Violence reduction requires major investments in research, social programs, collective ownership of the problem at the family and community as well as the national levels. And I want to emphasize the family and community levels. This would mean, Mr. Speaker, partnerships with the private sector in the form of investments in crime reduction activities with a timeline of roughly 5 to 10 years to reap the real benefits. But let me again repeat, you cannot reap those benefits down the road if you don't make the investments required from now, which does not give immediate results. The current figures show that violence directly wipes out approximately,
You're not hearing.
The member time for speaking.
Mr. Speaker, I ask that the member's time be extended by 15 minutes to allow him to complete his presentation.
Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Mr. Jackson.
Mr. Speaker, I realize that time is not adequate. Mr. Speaker, I'm making the point of our obligation to invest in long-term solutions, as against only focusing on the short-term interventions that we have a tendency to do. There are studies done, Mr. Speaker, in fact, in the region, that gives us the information to confirm that with scientific studies, we can identify the root causes and make the kind of reduction we want. Reduction strategies, Mr. Speaker, focus on the actors, the perpetrators, and in so doing help to reduce the number of victims. Mr. Speaker, this will require a major paradigm shift. Note, though, that no young person who perpetrates violence is only an actor. They are also victims of structural and direct violence. By now, we have all come to recognize that humans transfer violence. Males oppress younger ones, younger, smaller, or weaker males who find small and more economically vulnerable females to oppress. These battered women are the most likely to abuse children, and the children's the most likely to bully small and isolated children. This is why experts rescue both the bullied and the bully. It is a vicious cycle that we must break if we want long-term solution. Mr. Speaker, the Don's mobilizing power must be broken. But this requires an effective judiciary along with powerful legislations available to attack the wealth of criminal organizations. One of the core reasons young men join gangs is economic. Community-based gangs are connected to drug confederations of organized crime with intra-country, regional, and international reach. They are therefore able to keep young men employed within the economy of violence in settings where the state cannot find employment for young men. Again, Mr. Speaker, we have all known this for some time. What will make the difference is us doing what needs to be done. Mr. Speaker, in this regard, we must develop a system of social contracts with communities, which involves their maintaining low levels of violence or staying within certain behavioral framework in order to draw down on project monies. This could gradually replace getting project monies based on political affiliation or any other such affiliation. Projects include community tourism, sports, culture, and drama, etc. Mr. Speaker, we have already in the PAD program the provision where you only get continued benefit when you subscribe to the conditions which are set, like attendance of clinics and attendance in schools. Those are the kinds of linkages that we have to develop with those kinds of intervention. Mr. Speaker, in that regard, I also want to acknowledge the program in the JDF, the Service Corps, which is welcome. But, Mr. Speaker, the scope of the problem requires us to go in way beyond that with a sense of urgency. The problem of vulnerable youths are all across Jamaica. And I ask the question, Mr. Speaker, why don't we consider the Cadet Corps in the high schools where our boys are, which is one of the target groups that we need to engage with. Mr. Speaker, we must address Jamaica's families at risk mothers. 78% of mothers who were raped, tortured, or abused transfer this to their sons. Gangs are fueled in Jamaica by large numbers of neglected and tortured boys from fractured families in which the mothers were abused. Studies have indicated that 53% of all murders in the KMR are caused by repeat killers. Over 90% of them are from homes where they were tortured by their caregivers. Crisis families make up 5% of our households. The most urgent are the single mother households with no extended family attached or a stable visiting father, and in some cases, no attachment to community-based organizations or faith-based groups. These mothers are usually the ones who were tortured or sexually abused during childhood. Case studies in the inner cities in Jamaica show that only boys who are tortured by caregivers give down scores of more than 10, 6 out of 10. Mr. Speaker, this is alarming. It means that these boys are the core of the pool from which gangs recruit. The government of Jamaica and international donors should target these families for direct financial and social support. Mr. Speaker, I reiterate, it must be about the long-term solution, the intervention towards the long-term solution. And I repeat, you don't get the results you need now, but if you don't do it now, you will not get it 5, 10 years down the road, and it's a vicious cycle. Mr. Speaker, no such family should be allowed to carry on without intervention through a team of social workers and other social professionals. This is one of the major causes of violence, our violence nightmare. Data is needed to identify and help restore crisis families. If we take care of this in a radical way, within 5 years, the social landscape of Jamaica would be changed. Will we make that investment? Policies are needed, Mr. Speaker, to better protect boys. Awareness of their plight must be on the agenda. Boys are the primary victims of violence in Jamaica, and not surprising, they become our primary perpetrators. In the shortest possible time, the education surrounding how boys learn and thrive should be made widely known through teacher education and even social campaigns with comparable effort to that of current programs for girls. Mr. Speaker, I wish to highlight the following research data to support these points. Boys are three times more likely to be brutally beaten in the home than girls. They make up 93 to 93% of children victims of stabbings, shootings, and brutal battering. They make up 90 to 95% of children killed in Jamaica. They are actually far more likely to be killed than women and girls combined. They are 3 to 5 times more likely to be consistently hungry, 2 to 3 times more likely to be overweight. They are 3 times more likely than girls to be neglected by a father who does not live with them. They are almost always expected to drop out of school to find their sister's education when economic crisis hits the family. They are far more likely to be sent to picnic prison by family members than their sisters who commit the exact same crime of violence or stealing. They are less likely to be adopted when they are sent to foster home. A quarter of these working class and inner city boys hustle on the streets where they learn from others about the cruelty of the country and receive training in violence and survival. Mr. Speaker, another much talked about contributing factor for which not much has been done is school attendance. We need to close the absenteeism gap between inner city boys and other Jamaicans in the next 5 years. One effective way to reduce gangs is to keep boys in school. But Jamaica has become too male unfriendly in its gender movement to focus on boys' education. In 2004, a study indicated 50% of boys were out of school in the St. Catherine area. The average of dropout rate in urban St. Catherine males was 33%. There is a further study that shows, I know Montego Bay is very high. Yes. Mr. Speaker, short-term solutions. States of emergencies, Mr. Speaker, have their place. but it would be better if the criminal element woke up one morning to find arrest teams putting handcuffs on them in their beds, with cases against them prepared and ready for court. It should not escape our attention, Mr. Speaker, that since the first state of emergency in 1966, there have been 4 others up to 2017, a total of 5 in 40 years. Since 2018, we have had 2, and this fact signals that the government is at sea when it comes to controlling crime. The medium and long-range curbing of the crime monster must include the courts to which the detained offenders are passed for judgment. Sentencing upon conviction must be structured and creative for maximum deterrent effect. What is the sense of a life sentence that allows a criminal to conduct business as usual and have access to communication tools while imprisoned or on remand, to direct gang members to do away with or intimidate witnesses? Mr. Speaker, how can the government have convicted criminals in prison that police report are involved in almost 100 murders allowed such freedom? How can you have persons in prison able to order the killing of witnesses and their relatives? How can the public respect or have any confidence in our system when you cannot even control the criminals you have in jail, far less the ones on the street? How come? How can we expect confidence from the people? Mr. Speaker, we on this side intend to address the issue of contraband in prisons and make the case, make it easy and the ease with which criminals behind bars are able to engage in murderous activities. Mr. Speaker, I can assure you that the next administration of the People's National Party will ensure that anyone locked away in our penal institutions will be truly locked away and unable to commit crime against anyone in the public at large. Mr. Speaker, second-hand vehicles are not the only moral killer for the police. The shocking condition of the police stations in which they work and in some cases live in are enough to kill anyone's enthusiasm. The police officers themselves have emphasized the urgency of this matter just recently when I shared with them at their conference in St. Anne. Radical improvement of their overall work environment must be given priority as it has direct impact on their well-being and indeed on their performance. We cannot expect those who are in the forefront of the fight to be living in squalor and dilapidated conditions. Mr. Speaker, public monitoring of our streets, lanes, highways and byways, corners and every nook and cranny of our communities by closed-circuit cameras must be made a national emergency. We must seek financial and skills assistance from our international partners where necessary. Jamaica as a surfeit of private security companies, I believe time has come to consider some integration of private security cameras with the system used by the government. The use of CCTV against crime has been something long embraced by this side of the House. And this is confirmed by the pioneering project starting in 2006. We applaud the government's embrace of the initiative that we have started and which the government has rebranded Jamaica Eye. Indeed, the further development of this initiative by the former minister, the Minister of Security and the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, I have published
mischievous today, though. No more time.
Mr. Speaker, it's unusual to ask the House for a further extension after we extend the 15 minutes. We have set 45 and 30 minutes for speakers. And this year we have infringed on the standing order and extended each speaker by additional 50 minutes. I am therefore asking Mr. Speaker, breaking convention, asking for extension of 2 minutes for the speaker for the member to conclude his presentation.
Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. Mr. Jackson, we're going to roll the camera for you.
Mr. Speaker.
Wait.
I really just want to commend
Mr.
you,
Jackson. Wait, Mr. Jackson.
Mr. Former Minister of National Security.
Branding. Go ahead. Use your time. I don't believe this. What is this?
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I really wanted to commend the former Minister of National Security for his enthusiastic effort in developing that program. Mr. Speaker, colleagues, the assault on crime and the struggle to make our country as crime-free as possible and into a place where we can live and raise our families in peace is not going to be easy. It is an assault that we collectively must win. My fellow Jamaicans, let us, with no nonsense and meticulous planning and implementation, remove the phrases increasing murder rate and crime riddled from constantly being used in conjunction with the name of our beautiful country, Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, with every fiber and every bit of energy in my body, I resolve to lead a relentless fight on behalf of the opposition to make Jamaica a safer and more secure country again for all Jamaicans and not just a few. Mr. Speaker, I thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I ask you to invite the member from North Central St. Catherine to make her presentation for sectoral debate.
Somebody do it. Let's say you pull it up.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you go ahead.
Mr. Speaker, in this my 11th year of representing the people of North Central St. Catherine, I would like to express my gratitude to the Almighty for the sustenance of life and for the passion that continues to drive my pursuit for a better way of quality of life for them. Mr. Speaker, I do not take lightly this amazing opportunity to once again stand in this noble house to make another presentation in my continued quest to represent the best interests of the people of North Central specifically and the people of Jamaica generally. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank our party leader and the next Prime Minister of Jamaica, Dr. Peter Phillips, for the steady hand and visionary leadership he has brought to the post of opposition leader. I want to thank him specifically for the confidence he has reposed in me to defend the interests of the Jamaican people in the areas of sport, gender, and information from the opposition benches. I thank my constituents, the councillors, executive members, and the workers in North Central St. Catherine for their continued belief in me and for allowing me to be celebrating my 11th year as a Member of Parliament, along with 9 years as a local government representative. 20 years of representation of our people has required patience, love, sacrifice, and an unyielding desire to do the best I can for the most I can. Today, I reiterate my unwavering commitment to give of my best on behalf at all times. Mr. Speaker, I thank God for my two beautiful daughters and my extended family, a supportive partner whose love, commitment, and understanding have afforded me the opportunity to give of my best to my country and my party. You are my life, and I love you beyond words. Mr. Speaker, I commence with the gender portfolio. I stand here today as a proud member of a political movement which has been at the forefront of every major advancement we have made as a country in our quest for gender equality and advancement. Mr. Speaker, it was a People's National Party government who passed the Employment Act, Equal Pay for Men and Women, which legislated the fact that in Jamaica, there was no differential compensation for work done based on gender, but it was equity in compensation based on quality, standard, and competence. Mr. Speaker, it was a PNP government which passed the Maternity Leave Act, which provided the workers to get time off from work with pay, to give birth, and to be able to spend time with their children in the early stages of their life, without threat of their employment being terminated, wholly or partially, due to pregnancy or childbirth. Mr. Speaker, it was a PNP government that passed the Status of Children's Act, which made all children equal in status, irrespective of whether their parents are or have been married to each other. Mr. Speaker, it was a PNP who made us able to say in Jamaica, no bastard, no day again. Mr. Speaker, in continuing along the proud tradition of gender advancement in Jamaica, it was the People's National Party who produced Jamaica's first female Prime Minister. In no other person than the Most Honorable Portia Lucretia Simpson Miller, who I must pause here to once again pay tribute to her for personally being my mentor and for the selfless contributions that she has made and continues to make to Jamaica's advancement, both on the local and the international stage. Mr. Speaker, in using Portia Simpson Miller's example, it is unquestionable that the viability, vibrancy, and effectiveness of our parliament on both sides of the aisle is all the much better for having increased levels of female participation. Mr. Speaker, there has been some debate as to the merits of quotas, and while that debate continues, what I'm prepared to say here today without equivocation is that there are not enough female parliamentarians sitting here in this House today. Mr. Speaker, in any constituency you visit, as a member of Parliament, I can attest to the fact the vast majority of our political workers are women. Yes. So, Mr. Speaker, while the representation of women at every level in the political ladder is at least equal to that of our male counterparts, we do not see that translate to the highest levels of representation. The reasons for this, Mr. Speaker, ranges from a political culture that challenges our strength as women in relation to that of our male counterparts, to the amounts of financing that is required. It is the nature of our political culture that our male-led political parties tend to select or appoint a male to run as a candidate in the seats with higher possibilities of victory. Mr. Speaker, I'm making a call here today on both political parties to make the concerted effort in identifying suitably qualified and competent women to stand as candidates in more constituencies with a potential for victory for either party, so that there will be a significant increase in the number of elected females in this parliament. One of our most treasured resources is the Women's Center of Jamaica. Commendation must be given to the Women's Center for the tremendous work they have been doing to allow teen mothers to continue their studies, be integrated in schools, and to become employable. However, Mr. Speaker, there are significant challenges which are being faced by the centers across the country, and it is incumbent on the relevant ministry to provide the support necessary to coordinate a response to identify workable solutions to the challenges being faced. Mr. Speaker, some of these challenges include the lack of adequate spaces in the centers to host our girls and babies. Centers are faced with infrastructure challenges, such as leaking roofs. The lack of adequate spaces and infrastructural challenges has resulted in church halls being utilized to house the girls and babies, sometimes with beds for babies on the floor. And while we must extend gratitude to these churches for opening their facilities to provide a much-needed service, it must be highlighted that the situation is far from ideal, and we must strive to identify more spaces with more appropriate accommodation. Mr. Speaker, there's also the challenge of inadequate funding to assist our girls, who, for instance, are doing practical subjects and need financial support to buy the materials needed to complete their practical prerequisites to do exams. This oftentimes results in the girls not being able to do the exams at all. In addition, Mr. Speaker, there are girls who live far from the centers and are not able to attend classes because of lack of finances. Thus, they cannot sit their CSEC exams, which further limits their chances of attaining gainful employment and making advancements up the academic and professional ladder. We must continue to be mindful that these centers are mandated to provide a second chance and to prepare our young ladies who need the support with meaningful opportunities for self-fulfillment. Mr. Speaker, while we understand that the budget of the government and the budget of the ministry may be limited, not enough effort is being made to forge public-private partnerships through grants and other types of interventions so that our young ladies who are seeking government assistance to achieve their dreams can be given the best chance. We are therefore calling on the Minister to give some focused attention to the Women's Center and to coordinate and spearhead a national campaign around the successes of the Women's Center that involves true stories of former teen mothers who have graduated to become hard-working members of society and verbalizing the need for additional assistance for these young ladies. This campaign should also highlight the tremendous work which has been done and continues to be done at the Women's Center so that there can be greater buy-in from private sector and NGO community and the general citizenry to lend greater levels of assistance to the centers and the young ladies they serve. Mr. Speaker, I want to propose to the Minister the establishment of a formalized mentorship program for the teen mothers to motivate them to move beyond their current situations through academic, professional, and entrepreneurial pursuits in order to either become employable or ready to move to higher academic achievements. The program should seek to attract mentors who can also provide financial assistance through private sector affiliations, foundations, and non-profit organizations. Mr. Speaker, I listened to my colleague from St. Catherine who spoke before me, and it seemed we had the same thoughts. We usually do. Mr. Speaker, while we have made significant strides over decades in gender neutrality, with a particular focus on female empowerment, advancement, and equality, we have experienced a concurrent marginalization of our males. Mr. Speaker, this increased level of male marginalization has significantly contributed to the continued decline in the social fabric of our society. Mr. Speaker, as a country, we are faced with a situation in which the majority of our students who leave high school with few or no C-sex students are boys. Subjects are boys. The vast majority of violent crimes and murders committed by and perpetrated against teenage boys and young men are boys. Mr. Speaker, approximately 85% of all homicides in Jamaica are committed by young men between the ages of 15 and 29 years old. Over 90% of Jamaicans who have been prosecuted and are currently serving time behind bars are male. Mr. Speaker, when you look at our enrollment in tertiary institutions, we have a situation where over 70% of those enrolled are females, which is an indication that our males are either not matriculating or are not interested in pursuing higher education. Mr. Speaker, we persistently lament the challenge we face as a society when the multiplicity of unattached youth, the vast majority of these unattached youths, are males. Over 50% of our children born in Jamaica are born into single-parent households. And Mr. Speaker, over 95% of these single-parent households are headed by females. We are currently experiencing a crisis in which our children are growing up without fathers. Mr. Speaker, while I must say it is encouraging to see our young women and young girls poised for success, it is, however, unwise to allow generations of boys to grow up feeling ruthless and obsolete. This is really not a recipe for a peaceful and successful future. Mr. Speaker, who will our daughters marry? We have arrived at a place where specific and deliberate interventions are required to stem the slide in male marginalization. Mr. Speaker, we are proposing that a specific slew of incentives be implemented which are geared towards, one, significantly increasing the number of passes attained by our boys at CSEC, two, creating a culture where the majority of our young men are easily persuaded to seek to be involved in gainful employment and entrepreneurship and will therefore shun a life of crime. Three, an incentive scheme, Mr. Speaker, which will encourage all Jamaican men to want to stand up and be good, disciplined, and upstanding fathers to their children, to want to lead quality family lives, and to be good examples for their children. To this end, Mr. Speaker, I would like us to look at, in the instance where government provides subsidies for tertiary institutions, that it is stipulated that specific percentages of spaces be reserved for male students, particularly in technical and STEM subject areas, which have proven to be more attractive areas of study for males. Mr. Speaker, it is an imperative as a society that we now increase the number of males who are attaining tertiary education with the hope of gradually increasing these numbers to be more equally represented to their female counterparts. We have the capacity to expand these opportunities for our young men without reducing any of the opportunities for our young women. Mr. Speaker, in the government's dispensation of social services, we are proposing that where it is shown that men have fathered children, are seeking to have access to these services, that priority attention be given to those men who we can prove have played an active role as a father in their children's lives. Mr. Speaker, while we have to give commendation to our single mothers who stand in the breach while many men have shirked their responsibilities as fathers, we have to take deliberate steps to break the cycle and to incentivize active fatherhood through the provision of social services. Children need both mother and father to have a well-rounded upbringing. So, Speaker, there are a number of entrepreneurial and empowerment programs which have been developed over the years deliberately geared towards the development of women. We have seen the success of these programs as female advancement has occurred as a result. Let me be clear. We are nowhere advocating that these female-specific programs be curtailed or discontinued. What we are proposing is that similar specific programs be also developed for men, especially our young men and unattached males. Mr. Speaker, we have to take deliberate steps to develop and empower them. Mr. Speaker, it is obvious that there has been a lack of a coordinated national campaign around formidable issues facing our societies, such as issues of sexual harassment and gender-based violence. Mr. Speaker, this issue has been exacerbated by the fact that as a body responsible for enacting legislation, we have not passed the relevant laws to stamp out sexual harassment and gender-based violence. Mr. Speaker, in a letter to the Gleaner published on Saturday, May 18, 2018, Hillary Nicholson expressed what I have come to know are the sentiments of the majority of Jamaicans. It has now been 22 years since CARICOM drafted its model sexual harassment bill in 1996 for consideration by member states, but Jamaica still has no legislation. 5 other Caribbean countries, Bahamas, Belize, Guyana, St. Lucia, Trinidad and Tobago, now addressed sexual harassment as a legal issue in a standalone law or anti-discrimination legislation or in their laws on sexual offenses. It is a disgrace that the Jamaican Parliament cannot get its act together, pun intended, cannot get its act together. And of course, there have been many promises. Mr. Speaker, she further states, the culture of silence around sexual abuse often allows abusers to escape punishment. The silence may be exacerbated by victims' fear of reprisal, feelings of shame, or knowledge that justice will not be served anyway. Mr. Speaker, we on this side share the sentiments expressed by Hillary Nicholson. That is why when the PNP was last in government, the sexual harassment bill was drafted. It was approved by Cabinet. It was tabled in this House, and by no other person than our former Prime Minister, Portia Simpson-Miller, at the beginning of 2016. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, Parliament was dissolved as the elections were held before the bill was passed into law. Mr. Speaker, the current JLP government came to power and has been in power now for 2 years, and such an important bill as the sexual harassment bill has still not been retabled. Mr. Speaker, we did the consultations. We did all the hard work. We've drafted a comprehensive bill, and I'm therefore calling on the Prime Minister and the responsible minister to not delay any longer. We need the sexual harassment bill to be tabled in Parliament now and to be passed into law. Mr. Speaker, let us not play lip service to gender issues. Let us also move quickly to pass amendments to the Offences Against the Persons Act. On the matter of sport, Mr. Chairman, I ask for the Sport Museum project placed in the global sporting arena has been our place. Mr. Speaker, our place as Jamaicans in the sporting arena has been well established. Our sportsmen and women have impacted the world at several levels and in several sporting disciplines for more than 6 decades. As leaders in this honorable House, we have on numerous occasions taken the time to herald the outstanding contribution that our athletes have made in elevating the stature of our nation on the world stage. As citizens of Jamaica, we have all spent considerable personal time reveling with pride in the unmatched performance of our young people who celebrate our national colors with their remarkable demonstration of sporting prowess at every corner of the globe. The world has recognized our prowess in sport or in the sports arena. Other countries, including the advanced economies, would love to be the nation whose athletes holds the Guinness World Record for the most sub-10 races in history, or to brag that they have the fastest people in the world. Mr. Speaker, in the previous administration, we identified the establishment of a national sports museum as a priority. We sought and got the approval of Cabinet for the establishment of the museum on lands which were identified in the vicinity of the National Stadium. The particular location was chosen because we understood the museum's location was critical in ensuring its commercial viability, as well as ensuring that it was it was a safe and secure location for collecting and storing of artifacts. Mr. Speaker, we took into consideration the need for accessibility to the public, both local Jamaicans and the many who expect to visit the location from overseas. We identified a location which would fit the profile of a national sports museum for Jamaica. The Capacity Building and Infrastructure Committee of the National Sports Council was charged with the responsibility for spearheading the development of the facility. Mr. Speaker, we went as far as to identifying a curator who would be on loan to us from the Jamaica Defence Force Museum project to assist with the development of the project. Mr. Speaker, our former Finance Minister, Dr. Peter Phillips, allocated in our budget $35 million to commence the competition process for a museum project. So, the funds were allocated, budgeted, due diligence done, the UDC was engaged to do the competition. 2 years later, following that period, we have not seen any evidence to suggest that there is any further progress made on the advancing this significant national project. Mr. Speaker, we have seen the tremendous impact that sports education has had on sports development. The role of the GC Foster College of Physical Education and Sport can never be overstated. Indeed, our tertiary level institutions are expanding their education programs in recognition of the value of sports education. We must continue to work toward ensuring the sustainable development of programs and curricula that offer all participants in sport and the ability to excel in their discipline to pursue meaningful careers in sport. Mr. Speaker, I was so pleased to have seen the success of non-traditional high schools at the National High School Championships at the stadium. The impact of the program at the GC Foster College cannot be overstated in these developments. Schools like Rhodes Hall, RHODES, Rhodes Hall, and Green Island, who have succeeded. The impact of the program at the GC Foster College has been the result of this kind of achievement. There are, however, troubling signs coming out of that institution which need urgent attention to manage the irregularities. Mr. Speaker, we must ensure that these opportunities are always available to our people. Areas such as sports management, marketing, sports personalities, sport agency management, business of sports in relation to money management. Additional technical support is needed to train personnel such as coaches and referees and umpires and managers and sports physiotherapists, sports journalists, biometric scientists, and it goes on and on. I'm proposing today, Mr. Speaker, that the Ministry of Education, in collaboration with the Ministry of Sport, make a submission to the Cabinet to work closely with the GC Foster College to have it further transformed and developed into the GC Foster College, not college, GC Foster University. This will ensure that it is able to further meet the needs of the sports education and sports management which is required for a country like ours that possess such a rich history of sporting tradition and prowess. In addition, Mr. Speaker, we are further proposing that this transformation be coupled with the provision of government subventions in much the same way we support the other national universities. Mr. Speaker, it is incumbent on us as a country that we provide the requisite framework and support to sports in keeping with the requisite pride, joys, and successes which sport has provided us as a nation. Mr. Speaker, the rights of our children to participate in all forms of sport is enshrined in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. Children have the right to participate in sport in a safe and fun environment. Increasingly, we are seeing an upsurge in unfair practices and mental and physical abuse of our junior athletes. In our schools, sports through physical education has been a vital source of enjoyment, early development of talent, diversion from criminal and other antisocial behaviors, and a well-needed source of physical exercise. As our children transition from primary to secondary education, participating in sport takes on a competitive nature and creates a conscious development for coaches, officials, talented athletes, and recruiting high schools. Mr. Speaker, over the last 10 years, we have witnessed a more vocal response to the abuse of our children in sport across parts of the world. Given the critical emphasis placed on our high school sports program over the last 100 years, the time has come to not just speak about protecting our children in sport, but for the government to enter upon the reference of providing the policy framework that guides the process that will do so. I'm suggesting today that we are not yet in crisis. However, our personnel involved in sport are looking forward to having this protective legislation. Those who have worked hard, give of themselves, made the sacrifice to develop their talent in sport even when nothing was available to them, we commend them today. It is, however, quite clear, Mr. Speaker, that there are always unscrupulous persons who are abusing our children through acts of commission or omission. Our success must not only promote how we can best capitalize on talents of our people, but must seek to preserve the rights of our people. Students are students, and while in school and are under 18 must be treated like children and not as machinery to be utilized for point scoring, bragging rights, and monetary gain. Our children must be allowed to gain an education while developing the skills towards a career goal. We often push our students so hard in sport that oftentimes many don't get an opportunity to transition to the senior level or the professional landscape. Minister, we commenced this process in 2015 and believed it would have been completed by now.
Mr. Leader, the member's time for speaking.
Mr. Speaker, I ask that the member's time be extended by 15 minutes to allow her to complete her presentation.
Those in favour? Those against? As ever. Nita, you have 15 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, members. Minister, who isn't here today, but she will, the Prime Minister, I'm sure, will take keynote. I want to urge us all to continue to push for the advancement of the high school infrastructure improvement project. Our high schools' sporting facilities need improvement across the country. If children are to grow where they are planted, we must indeed provide fertile ground on which they are planted. And so we want to implore you to speak strongly, to urge those in the private and the public sector to give 100% support to this project. On the matter of information, Mr. Speaker, we have been living in what has been dubbed as the information age. where there are numerous channels, new and traditional, to ensure anyone, anywhere is informed about any intended message. I know that the government has utilized digital media platforms heavily, with a heavy presence on most of our popular social media sites. However, Mr. Speaker, let us be wary of the phenomena of fake news and political propaganda taking root and becoming part of our norm. The dangers of not regulating information can result in users becoming angry, confused, fearful, and can promote the abuse of power, which will threaten our treasured democratic process. Mr. Speaker, I'm disappointed that as we try to move our democracy further into advancement, the very vital post-cabinet press briefings that is a long-standing valuable precedent set by the countless administrations prior was abandoned by the information portfolio and by extension, our own Prime Minister. Let us ensure that this vital source of communication is always preserved. I warn that those who promote fake news without verifying authenticity are no better than common law breakers. Media practitioners have an extremely important task in ensuring that relevant and accurate information is disseminated via multiple platforms to inform the public. When the Press Association of Jamaica had to make a national call to the government asking about the resumption of the briefings, it shows that the government is showing a lack of respect for media practitioners and a lack of regard for our citizens who need information about the policies being undertaken by the cabinet and the government. Information dissemination to all Jamaicans is at the core of the democratic process because it's a means of us ascertaining transparency on the part of government. As a former minister, I took this seriously. Mr. Speaker, let me say this. If you have nothing to hide, why shy away from speaking to those you serve? As it stands, Mr. Speaker, zones of special operations have been named. State of emergencies have been ordered. A regional hospital was in crisis. All of these are just coming out as scattered sound bites and Twitter uploads and staged photographs. Mr. Speaker, we are indeed forced to ask on behalf of the people, why is the government hiding the information? Why can't we get the answers from the media regarding the decisions that have been implemented? Why aren't the relevant ministers able to give relevant information on their portfolios? The opposition not only joins the PAJ in their call for the resumption of the briefings, we also implore the government to be about the business of the country and, like corporate CEOs, answer to their boards and stakeholders. This government must answer to the Jamaican people, their stakeholders, as they make decisions that affect the expenditure of taxpayer dollars. We don't want to be faced with a government that is not always present to answer the tough questions. A government that basks in the limelight, take photos, give interviews, and disseminate information when things are going well, but goes missing when faced with challenges. Mr. Speaker, this is when the dissemination of accurate information is critical. The periods when the Jamaican people need most to be provided with reassurance and clear directions. We need to have a government. We need to have a government that can provide answers to the very challenges we face. It was Spencer Johnson who said, "Integrity is telling myself the truth. Honesty is telling the people the truth." And in the words of Bruce Coville, withholding information is the essence of tyranny. Control of the flow of information is the tool of dictatorship. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I ask for the suspension of the sectoral debate until next Tuesday. And it's not intended to do any further business today, so I ask that the House be adjourned until next Tuesday, the 12th at 2 p.m.
Order, please. The motion is that we suspend the debate and that the House be adjourned until the 12th of June at 2 p.m. Those in favor? Those against? This Honorable House stands adjourned.